In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars burned like ancient lanterns and nebulae painted the void with colors no human eye could truly comprehend, there existed a species whose beauty was as terrifying as it was mesmerizing. They were the Zaleith, an alien race that had mastered not only the art of survival but also the delicate balance between domination and grace. Their civilization thrived on power dynamics, intricate rituals, and a culture steeped in both elegance and cruelty. Among them stood their queen, an entity so breathtakingly radiant she seemed carved from the very essence of starlight itself. Her skin shimmered with hues of liquid gold and opalescent silver, shifting subtly under the dim glow of her throne room's bioluminescent fixtures. Her eyes held galaxies within them, swirling constellations that seemed to pierce through time and space. She moved with an ethereal fluidity, each step a symphony of calculated precision and otherworldly allure. To look upon her was to be ensnared by something beyond comprehension, a being who embodied perfection yet radiated an aura of unyielding authority. The Zaleith society revolved around her will, for she was more than just a ruler, she was a deity incarnate. Her decisions shaped destinies, her whims dictated fates, and her presence commanded reverence. Yet, despite her divine status, there lingered an insatiable hunger within her, a craving for conquest, not merely of lands or resources but of souls. The queen sought connection, though not out of loneliness or vulnerability. It was a desire born of dominance, a need to claim what others deemed untouchable. Humanity, scattered across distant colonies after Earth's demise, remained largely unaware of the Zaleith's existence. But fate has its own peculiar ways of intertwining threads, even when those threads belong to vastly different fabrics. And so, amidst the cold silence of interstellar travel, one man found himself caught in the gravitational pull of forces far greater than himself, a collision course with destiny that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Kale Draven never imagined he'd become anything more than another cog in humanity's relentless expansion into the stars. A technician aboard the mining vessel Eclipse, his days blurred together in monotonous cycles of maintenance checks, diagnostics, and repairs. He wasn't extraordinary, not particularly brave, nor exceptionally clever. Yet there was something about him, a quiet resilience etched into every line of his weathered face, that set him apart without drawing attention. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, shoulders squared against unseen burdens, or how his dark eyes seemed to hold stories he rarely shared. When the distress signal came crackling through the comm system, a faint pulse of static-laden words begging for aid, Kale didn't hesitate. It wasn't heroism that drove him but rather an instinctive sense of duty, cultivated over years spent fixing broken things. The coordinates led them to an uncharted sector of space, where the Eclipse drifted cautiously toward a derelict alien craft adrift among the wreckage of what appeared to be a battle. The ship was unlike anything Kale had ever seen. Sleek curves adorned with crystalline patterns that refracted light into dazzling rainbows, its surface pulsating faintly as if alive. Captain Voss ordered a small team to investigate, and Kale volunteered almost reflexively. As they boarded the silent vessel, the air thickened with an electric charge, prickling at their skin. The corridors were eerily empty, save for strange symbols glowing softly along the walls. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous, exactly, but invasive, as though the very fabric of the ship was observing them. Then, without warning, the lights flared violently, blinding them all. When Kale opened his eyes again, he was alone. Panic clawed at his chest as he called out for his crewmates, his voice swallowed by the oppressive stillness. That's when he saw her, or rather, felt her first. A presence loomed behind him, suffocating yet magnetic, pulling him backward with invisible tendrils. Turning slowly, he froze. There she stood, the alien queen, resplendent and terrible in her magnificence. Her form defied description, oscillating between humanoid and something far more celestial. Her gaze locked onto his, and in that moment, Kale understood two truths simultaneously. He was utterly insignificant before her, and somehow, impossibly, she wanted him. Before he could react, the world dissolved into chaos. Energy surged through the ship, lifting him off his feet as if caught in a hurricane. Pain lanced through his body, sharp and searing, as tendrils of golden light wrapped around him, binding him tighter than any chain. His last coherent thought before blackness claimed him was simple yet devastating. I'm hers now. When Kale regained consciousness, he found himself sprawled on a floor that shimmered like molten glass, smooth and cool beneath his fingertips. The chamber around him was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, while walls of translucent crystal pulsed rhythmically, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the room. The air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something floral yet foreign, making his lungs feel heavier with each breath. Panic surged anew as fragmented memories of the queen flooded back. Her piercing gaze, the tendrils of light, the overwhelming sensation of being claimed. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, weak and unresponsive. A low hum vibrated through the floor, resonating deep within his bones, and he realized it wasn't just the environment, it was her. She was near. The realization sent a shiver racing down his spine, part fear, part something else he couldn't name. Before he could gather his wits, a sound echoed through the chamber, soft yet commanding, like wind chimes struck by a storm. It wasn't speech, not in any language he knew, yet he understood it instinctively. Do not move. Her voice, no, her presence, seemed to press against him from all sides, suffocating and intoxicating at once. Moments later, she emerged from the shadows, her luminous figure gliding gracefully toward him. Up close, she was even more awe-inspiring, her skin shifting between shades of liquid gold and iridescent pearl, her eyes twin galaxies spinning endlessly. She wore no clothing in the human sense, yet her body was draped in flowing strands of energy that danced like living silk, clinging to her form and accentuating her impossible beauty. She stopped mere inches away, towering over him. Her head tilted slightly as if studying a curious insect. Kale forced himself to meet her gaze, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to look away. "Why am I here?" he managed to choke out, his voice hoarse and trembling. The question hung in the air, fragile and defiant, until she responded, not with words, but with an emotion so raw and primal it crashed over him like a tidal wave. Possession. Ownership. Desire. Her hand, slender and impossibly delicate, reached out to cup his chin, tilting his face upward. Her touch was neither gentle nor harsh, but deliberate, as though branding him with her will. Kale's heart thundered in his chest, his body rigid with tension. He wanted to pull away, to fight, but something rooted him to the spot, a mix of terror and an inexplicable magnetism that made resistance feel futile. "You are mine," she said finally, her voice resonating directly in his mind, bypassing ears and language altogether. Each syllable reverberated through him, sinking into his core like molten lead. "You will serve me." "Serve you?" he echoed, incredulous despite his fear. "I'm not some object to be owned." Her expression shifted imperceptibly, a flicker of amusement rippling across her features. Without warning, pain exploded in his temples, forcing him to his knees. It wasn't physical agony exactly, but something deeper, a violation of his very consciousness, as though she were rifling through his thoughts, peeling back layers of his identity piece by piece. Memories flashed before his eyes, his childhood on Mars Colony Delta, the loss of his parents, the endless grind aboard the Eclipse. Every moment of joy, sorrow, and regret laid bare for her scrutiny. And then, just as suddenly, the pain ceased. Kale gasped for air, clutching his head as tears streamed down his cheeks. What did you do to me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know you now," she replied, her tone devoid of empathy yet oddly intimate. "Your strengths. Your weaknesses. Your fears. You are imperfect, fragile, fleeting, but you are mine nonetheless." The weight of her declaration crushed him. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to deny her claim, but the truth settled over him like a suffocating blanket. She had stripped away his defenses, exposed the raw essence of who he was, and left him powerless to resist. For the first time in his life, Kale truly understood what it meant to be owned, not by force alone, but by a level of understanding so profound it bordered on omniscience. As she turned away, her flowing energy trailing behind her like a comet's tail, Kale collapsed onto the shimmering floor, his mind reeling. He didn't know what awaited him next, only that escape was no longer an option. Whether he liked it or not, his fate was intertwined with hers, and resisting would only prolong the inevitable. Days bled into weeks, though Kale could scarcely keep track of time in the alien queen's domain. Every moment stretched and warped under her watchful gaze, each sunrise and sunset simulated by the crystalline walls that surrounded him. The initial shock of captivity began to fade, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty that clawed at his sanity. She hadn't spoken much since that first encounter, instead observing him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Meals, strange concoctions of shimmering liquids and gelatinous solids, were delivered silently by drones that glided like ghosts, leaving him to eat alone in the cavernous chamber. Sleep eluded him, haunted by dreams of her voice echoing in his mind, whispering words he couldn't understand. Yet, amidst the isolation, Kale found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. It wasn't love or affection, not in any human sense, but rather a twisted fascination born of proximity and powerlessness. She was everywhere. In the hum of the air, the pulsating light of the crystals, the weight of her presence pressing down on him even when she wasn't physically near. Occasionally, she would summon him to her throne room, where she perched atop a dais of cascading energy, her form radiant and untouchable. During these audiences, she would test him, asking questions about his past, probing his knowledge of humanity, dissecting his responses with surgical precision. At times, she seemed almost curious, her galaxy-like eyes narrowing as if searching for something hidden within him. Other times, she was cruel, forcing him to recount painful memories or subjecting him to waves of psychic pressure that left him gasping and trembling. Despite her callousness, Kale began to notice subtle shifts in her demeanor. She never smiled, not in any way humans might recognize, but there were moments when her expression softened infinitesimally, as though she were experiencing something akin to satisfaction. Once, during one of their sessions, she extended her hand and allowed him to touch it, a gesture so unexpected it took him several seconds to react. Her skin was warm, impossibly smooth, and tingled faintly beneath his fingers, sending jolts of electricity coursing through his arm. When he looked up at her, startled, she withdrew her hand abruptly, her expression unreadable. These interactions, sparse and enigmatic as they were, planted seeds of hope within him. Hope that perhaps she wasn't entirely devoid of compassion, that maybe he could find a way to navigate this bizarre relationship. But such thoughts were quickly tempered by reality. One evening, as he sat cross-legged on the shimmering floor, staring blankly at the pulsating walls, she entered the chamber unannounced. Her arrival sent a ripple of tension through the air, and Kale scrambled to his feet, bracing himself for whatever test she had devised next. Instead, she approached him slowly, her movements deliberate and hypnotic. "You have adapted," she said, her voice resonating in his mind. "But adaptation is not submission." Before he could respond, she raised her hand, and a surge of energy coursed through him, forcing him to his knees. This time, however, the pain was accompanied by images, visions of destruction, entire worlds reduced to ash, civilizations crumbling under her rule. He saw her leading armies of Zaleith warriors, her beauty a weapon as lethal as any blade. And then, amidst the chaos, he saw himself, standing beside her, bowing before her, pledging loyalty in a voice that sounded both alien and achingly familiar. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Kale gasping for breath, sweat pouring down his face. What was that?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. "A glimpse of your future," she replied, her tone colder than ever. "Resistance is futile, human. You will bend to my will, whether willingly or otherwise." For the first time since his capture, Kale felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he met her gaze. "No," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "I won't." Her reaction was immediate and brutal. With a flick of her wrist, invisible forces slammed him against the wall, pinning him there as if held by invisible chains. Pain radiated through his body, sharp and unrelenting, yet he refused to cry out. Instead, he stared at her, his eyes blazing with determination. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise? Admiration? He couldn't be sure. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure eased, and he slid to the floor, gasping for air. She stood over him, her face unreadable, before turning and gliding out of the chamber without another word. As the door sealed behind her, Kale slumped against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He didn't know why he had defied her, only that it felt right, a small act of rebellion in a sea of helplessness. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if she had expected it. Time continued its relentless march, marked only by the shifting patterns of light within the Queen's crystalline palace. Kale's defiance, though brief, lingered like a scar on him, and perhaps on her as well. She returned less frequently after that day, her appearances unpredictable and laden with an unspoken tension. When she did summon him, her demeanor had shifted imperceptibly, her curiosity mingling with something darker, more complex. It was as though his act of resistance had unsettled her, cracked open some hidden fissure in her seemingly unassailable facade. Their encounters grew stranger, charged with an electric current that neither acknowledged outright. Once, she brought him to a vast observation deck, its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the cosmos outside. Stars wheeled lazily in the infinite void, their light refracting through the crystalline structure of the palace, painting everything in prismatic hues. She stood beside him, closer than usual, her presence almost tangible. "Do you fear death, human?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. Not as much as I fear losing myself," he admitted finally, his gaze fixed on the stars. "If I stop fighting, if I give in completely, I'll cease to exist. Isn't that worse?" She turned to look at him then, her galaxy-like eyes searching his face. For a moment, he thought she might say something meaningful, offer some insight into her own motivations. Instead, she simply nodded, as if filing his response away for later consideration. "You are resilient," she murmured, almost to herself. "It is both admirable and infuriating." Another time, she took him to a chamber filled with holographic projections of alien worlds, each one teeming with life, culture, and history. As they walked among the shimmering displays, she explained their significance, her tone clinical yet tinged with pride. These were the civilizations she had conquered, assimilated, or annihilated. Kale listened silently, his stomach churning at the scale of her ambition. Yet, when they reached a projection of Earth, a blue-green orb suspended in the darkness, he stopped, unable to tear his eyes away. "This is where you came from," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "A fragile rock, consumed by greed and war. Is it any wonder it fell?" Kale clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "We didn't deserve extinction," he shot back, surprising even himself with the vehemence in his tone. "No one does." Her expression hardened, but there was no immediate retaliation, no psychic assault to punish his insolence. Instead, she regarded him thoughtfully, as if weighing his words. "Survival requires sacrifice," she countered, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. "Weakness cannot endure." "And what about kindness?" he challenged, emboldened by her restraint. "Compassion? Are those weaknesses too?" For the first time, she hesitated, her perfect composure faltering. "Kindness is indulgence," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "Compassion is vulnerability. Neither belongs in a ruler." "But maybe they should," he pressed, taking a step closer despite the danger. "Maybe strength isn't just about domination. Maybe it's about understanding, about connection." Her eyes narrowed, twin storms brewing within their depths. "Connection is a liability," she snapped, her voice rising sharply. "It breeds dependence, weakness, failure." "Or trust," he countered, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. "Trust can make you stronger, not weaker." She stepped back then, her expression unreadable, and dismissed him with a curt wave of her hand. As Kale retreated to his quarters, his mind raced with possibilities. Had he pushed too far? Or had he struck a nerve, exposed a crack in her armor? Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Over the following days, her behavior became increasingly erratic. She summoned him more often, sometimes to interrogate him further, other times simply to sit in silence, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Once, during one of these silent vigils, she reached out and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip, her touch feather-light yet electrifying. "You confuse me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not understand why I allow you to remain." Kale swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "Maybe because I'm not afraid to tell you the truth," he ventured cautiously. "Even when you don't want to hear it." Her hand dropped to her side, and she turned away, her regal form silhouetted against the glowing walls. "Truth is subjective," she said dismissively, though her tone betrayed a hint of doubt. And fear is irrelevant. But Kale wasn't so sure. From the beginning, their dynamic had been defined by power, hers absolute, his non-existent. Yet now, cracks were forming in that foundation, tiny fissures widening with every exchange. He didn't know what it meant, only that the stakes were higher than ever. If he could continue chipping away at her certainty, exposing the contradictions within her, perhaps he could find a way to reclaim some semblance of control, not just over his fate, but over hers as well. The boundaries between captor and captive blurred further as days stretched into months. Kale's defiance evolved into a quiet rebellion, his words carefully chosen daggers aimed at the heart of her convictions. Each conversation became a battlefield, every silence heavy with unspoken implications. She tested him relentlessly, probing for weaknesses, yet her methods grew less overtly cruel and more calculating. He began to notice subtleties in her behavior, the way her gaze lingered on him during their exchanges, the slight tilt of her head when he countered her arguments, the barely perceptible softening of her features when he dared to challenge her worldview. One evening, she summoned him to a chamber unlike any he had seen before. The walls were lined with luminescent vines that pulsed gently, casting a warm, organic glow throughout the space. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a crystalline orb swirling with iridescent colors. Her presence was subdued, almost hesitant, as she gestured for him to approach. "This is the Hearthstone," she explained, her voice unusually gentle. "It holds the essence of my people, our history, our purpose." Kale hesitated, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you question everything," she replied, her galaxy-like eyes locking onto his. "Including me." As he reached out to touch the orb, a flood of sensations overwhelmed him. Images of ancient battles, triumphant conquests, and moments of profound unity among the Zaleith. But woven through these visions were threads of sorrow, loss, and longing. He saw glimpses of her younger self, vulnerable and uncertain, grappling with the weight of leadership thrust upon her. The experience left him breathless, his mind reeling as he pulled his hand back. "You carry burdens I can't imagine," he said quietly, his voice tinged with newfound empathy. "But ruling doesn't have to mean destroying everything in your path." Her expression darkened, though not with anger. "And what would you have me do?" she demanded, her voice edged with desperation. "Abandon my people? Forsake my legacy?" "No," he countered firmly. "But maybe it's time to redefine what strength means, to yourself and to them." She turned away, her shoulders tense, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You ask too much of me." "Maybe," he admitted. "But isn't that better than asking nothing at all?" Her response was interrupted by a sudden tremor that shook the palace, sending shards of light scattering across the floor. Alarms blared in the distance, their shrill tones slicing through the air. Her demeanor shifted instantly, all traces of vulnerability vanishing as she assumed her role as queen. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice steel once more. Kale ignored her order, following her into the chaos unfolding beyond the chamber. The corridors were alive with activity, Zaleith warriors rushing past, their weapons glowing ominously. Through the windows, he saw ships descending from the sky, their designs unfamiliar yet menacing. The queen barked commands, her authority undeniable, yet Kale detected a flicker of unease in her eyes. "What's happening?" he demanded, grabbing her arm impulsively. She wrenched free, her gaze sharp and unforgiving. "An invasion," she spat. "Traitors seeking to overthrow me." Before he could process her words, a blast rocked the structure, sending debris flying. Instinctively, Kale shielded her with his body, earning a glare of indignation. "You dare protect me?" she hissed. "You're not the only one who makes mistakes," he shot back, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Now let me help you fix this." For a heartbeat, she hesitated, torn between pride and necessity. Then, with a curt nod, she handed him a weapon, a sleek device humming with alien energy. Together, they plunged into the fray, their alliance forged in fire and uncertainty. The battle raged through the crystalline halls of the Queen's palace, each explosion fracturing the shimmering walls and sending shards of light scattering like wounded stars. Kale fought alongside her, wielding the alien weapon with clumsy determination. The invaders were relentless, masked figures clad in shadowy armor, their movements fluid and predatory. They moved with purpose, targeting key structures within the palace, as if intent on dismantling not just her rule but the very foundation of Zaleith civilization. For all his defiance, Kale found himself fighting not out of loyalty to the queen but out of a desperate need to survive, and perhaps something deeper. He couldn't explain why he cared whether she lived or died, only that her fall would leave a void he wasn't ready to face. As they exchanged fire with the enemy, their coordination became instinctive, almost symbiotic. She would shield him from incoming blasts while he took aim at attackers attempting to flank them. In those moments, their connection transcended words, forged in the heat of shared peril. But the tide turned abruptly when one of the invaders, a towering figure wreathed in dark energy, stepped forward, flanked by a cadre of elite warriors. His voice boomed through the chaos, amplified by technology or sheer force of will. "Your reign ends here, Arathan," he declared, addressing the queen by name for the first time. "The people have grown weary of your tyranny." The queen, Arathan, stiffened, her luminous form flickering faintly as if the accusation struck a nerve. "You dare call me tyrant?" she spat, her voice laced with venom. "I have led our people to greatness." "At what cost?" the invader countered, his tone cutting. "Countless worlds burned, lives extinguished, cultures erased, all for your ambition. We will no longer bow to your cruelty." Kale glanced between them, realizing this was more than a coup. It was a reckoning. These rebels weren't merely seeking power, they sought justice, however misguided it might seem. And yet, as he looked at Arathan standing defiant amidst the destruction, he saw not just a ruler but a being caught in the crossfire of her own contradictions. Her strength had been her greatest asset, but also her fatal flaw. "Enough!" Arathan snarled, raising her hand to unleash a devastating wave of energy. The rebel leader countered with a blast of his own, the collision creating a shockwave that sent both forces stumbling backward. Kale seized the opportunity, lunging toward the rebel leader with desperation fueling his every move. But before he could strike, Arathan intervened, stepping directly into the line of fire to protect him once again. Her action stunned everyone, including Kale. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of residual energy. The rebel leader lowered his weapon slightly, his expression unreadable beneath his mask. "Why do you defend him?" he asked, genuine confusion coloring his voice. "He is nothing, a human, weak and insignificant." "He is mine," Arathan replied, her tone absolute. Yet there was something softer beneath her declaration, a vulnerability that hadn't existed before. "And I will not allow harm to come to what is mine." Kale froze, torn between indignation and awe. Even now, she claimed ownership over him, framing her actions through the lens of possession. But he understood, deep down, that it wasn't about control anymore, it was about connection. She had chosen to stand beside him, even knowing it might cost her everything. The realization ignited a spark within him. Turning to face the rebel leader, Kale raised his weapon, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. "If you want her throne, you'll have to go through me too." It was a reckless declaration, one born of defiance and newfound resolve. He didn't know if he could win, only that he wouldn't back down. The rebel hesitated, clearly unprepared for such solidarity between captor and captive. Before he could respond, Arathan unleashed another surge of energy, forcing the invaders to retreat momentarily. Seizing the brief reprieve, she grabbed Kale's arm and dragged him toward a hidden passageway. "We must regroup," she said sharply, though her grip on him was oddly gentle. They fled deeper into the palace, pursued by sporadic bursts of enemy fire. The corridors grew narrower, the air thick with smoke and the acrid tang of burnt crystal. Finally, they reached a secure chamber sealed off by heavy doors. Once inside, Arathan activated a series of holographic displays, revealing the extent of the invasion. Ships swarmed the skies above, bombarding the palace with precision strikes. Reinforcements were en route, but they wouldn't arrive in time. "We can't hold them off alone," Kale said grimly, studying the tactical readouts. "There has to be another way." Arathan's gaze flickered toward him, unreadable yet piercing. What would you suggest, human? Surrender. No, he replied firmly. But maybe we don't fight them head-on. Maybe we give them what they want. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. They're fighting because they believe you've betrayed the ideals of your people, he continued, choosing his words carefully. Show them they're wrong. Offer them a new vision, one where strength doesn't mean domination, where conquest gives way to coexistence. You said yourself that survival requires sacrifice. Maybe it's time to redefine what that means. She stared at him, her expression a storm of conflicting emotions. For the first time, Kale saw uncertainty etched plainly across her radiant features. And if they refuse? She asked quietly, her voice tinged with fear. Then we fight together, he said simply. Not as ruler and prisoner, but as equals. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked as though she might argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, her decision made. Together, they returned to the main hall, where the remaining defenders rallied around her. When she addressed them, her voice carried a weight it never had before, not of command, but of hope. My people, she began, her words resonating through the chamber. I have led you with strength, but perhaps I have forgotten compassion. Today, I offer you a choice. Join me in forging a new path, one where we build instead of destroy, where we listen instead of conquer. Or reject me, and take my place if you believe you can lead better. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, one by one, the defenders lowered their weapons, nodding in agreement. The rebels, witnessing this unexpected display of humility, hesitated long enough for negotiations to begin. What followed was chaotic yet transformative, a fragile truce brokered under the shadow of war, with promises of change echoing through the fractured halls of the palace. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the wounds began to heal, Kale stood beside Arathan, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in hues of gold and crimson. Neither spoke, their bond unspoken yet undeniable. She still viewed him as hers, but now he saw himself differently too, not as property, but as a partner in shaping a future neither could imagine alone. As the light danced across her shimmering form, Kale realized the battle wasn't truly over. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, compromises, and sacrifices. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for her, and perhaps for all who followed in their wake.